A woman worth $200 million whispered 3 words to her driver on her deathbed, and those 3 words burned her entire family to the ground. Samuel Obi came back after 22 years. He had left as a houseboy with nothing, no money, no name, no future. He expected to find the woman who had raised him living in comfort, surrounded by her children, enjoying the reward of a life well lived. But what he found instead was an 81-year-old woman dying alone in a back room of her own mansion, while her children fought over her fortune in the parlor downstairs. What Samuel did next didn't just change his life. It exposed a secret that had been rotting at the heart of the Adewale family for over 2 decades. Welcome, welcome. Please hit that subscribe button and like this video. Now tell us, where are you tuning in from? Dallas? Durban? Maybe Bridgetown or Toronto? We read every single comment. Now, you might be wondering how a poor driver ended up in a dying billionaire's bedroom. Let me tell you. Bless his heart, this young man had no idea what was waiting for him. Samuel Obi was 39 years old. He was a quiet man, the kind of quiet that people mistake for emptiness, but which was actually full of things he had learned to keep to himself. He was average height, slim, with dark brown skin that had been roughened by years of sun and wind and long hours behind a steering wheel. He had a thin face, serious eyes, and a small scar above his right eyebrow from a bicycle accident when he was 11. His hands were lean and strong, the hands of a man who had been working since before his body was ready for it. He had a habit of rubbing his left thumb against his right palm when he was nervous, a slow, circular motion, over and over, like he was trying to smooth out a worry that lived in his skin. Samuel drove a taxi in Lagos, not one of the yellow commercial ones, a private car, a faded gray Toyota Camry with 260,000 kilometers on it, a crack in the windshield that he'd been meaning to fix for 3 years, and an air freshener shaped like a pine tree hanging from the rearview mirror that hadn't had any scent for months. He drove 12 to 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. He picked up businessmen on Victoria Island. He drove market women to Ikeja. He took children to school in Lekki and old men to hospital appointments in Yaba. He knew every shortcut, every pothole, every traffic light in Lagos. He knew which roads flooded when it rained and which bridges got jammed at 4 o'clock and which roundabouts to avoid on Friday afternoons. The car was his office, his living room, his church. He spent more time in that Camry than he spent anywhere else on earth. He lived in a single room in Agege, a concrete block room on the ground floor of a 3-story building with no elevator and unpredictable water. The room had a mattress on the floor, a small table with a gas burner where he cooked rice and stew, a plastic chair, and a nail on the wall where he hung his one good shirt, a white button-down that he ironed every Sunday night for the week ahead. The ceiling had a brown water stain shaped like a map of nowhere. The window had no curtain, just a piece of fabric, an old Ankara cloth that he had tacked over the frame to block the morning sun. The room smelled like kerosene and onions and the particular brand of detergent he used to wash his clothes by hand in a plastic basin. Samuel had no wife, no children, no family as far as anyone in Lagos knew. When people asked where he was from, he said, "The East," and changed the subject. When they asked about his parents, he said, "Gone," and that was the end of it. He was polite. He was reliable. He showed up on time. He didn't cheat on fares. He said good morning, and thank you, and God bless you, and he meant every word. But he kept a distance between himself and the world, a careful, practiced distance, like a man standing at the edge of a cliff who knows exactly how close he can get without falling. But Samuel had a past, and that past had a name. The name was Adewale. Now let me tell you about the Adewale family, because this is where the story gets heavy. Pay attention. Chief Mrs. Falake Adewale was 81 years old. She was, or had been, one of the richest women in Nigeria. Her late husband, Chief Adewale, had built a business empire in the 1970s, real estate, shipping, and oil services. When he died in 2004, Falake inherited everything. She ran the companies for another 10 years with an iron hand and a sharp mind, growing the family fortune until it was worth over $200 million. She was a tall woman, even in old age, 5'9", with silver hair she wore in a crown of braids, and a face that had been beautiful once and was still striking. She had high cheekbones and deep-set eyes that could make a boardroom full of men go silent just by looking up from her papers. But now Falake was dying. Cancer, pancreatic, stage 4, diagnosed 8 months ago. The doctors said she had weeks, maybe a month. She was in the master bedroom of her mansion in Ikoyi, a vast room with mahogany furniture and cream-colored curtains, and a hospital bed that had been brought in to replace the king-size bed she had shared with her husband for 40 years. The room smelled like medicine and lavender oil and something faintly sweet that might have been decay. Monitors beeped softly. An IV dripped. A private nurse named Sister Grace sat in a chair by the window, reading a Bible and checking Falake's vitals every 30 minutes. Falake had 3 children, 3 grown, educated, wealthy children, and not one of them was in the room with her. Let me tell you about them, because what kind of people leave their mother to die alone? I tell you, some people have no shame. The eldest was Kunle, 53 years old. He was the managing director of Adewale Holdings, the family's main company. He wore expensive suits, drove a Bentley, and had an office on the top floor of a building in Victoria Island with a view of the lagoon. He called himself a businessman, but most of the actual business was handled by people below him. Kunle's real talent was spending money. Lavish parties, overseas trips, a house in London, another in Dubai. He had been living off the family name for 30 years, and he guarded access to the family fortune the way a dog guards a bone. The second was Yemi, 50 years old. She was married to a politician and lived in Abuja. She visited Lagos twice a year, once for Christmas and once for her mother's birthday. She sent money instead of time. She called it taking care of Mama. What she was actually taking care of was her own guilt. The youngest was Tunde, 46 years old. He was the wild card, charming, reckless, always in trouble. He had started 3 businesses and bankrupted all of them. He owed money to people who did not like to be owed money. He smiled like a man with no problems and drank like a man with nothing but. These 3 children were not in their mother's bedroom. They were downstairs, in the parlor of the Ikoyi mansion, sitting around a dining table with 2 lawyers and a stack of documents. They were not discussing their mother's care. They were not planning her comfort. They were dividing her estate. While she was still breathing, while her heart was still beating on a monitor upstairs, they were already slicing the pie. But what none of them knew, what nobody in that house knew, was that Falake had made a decision 3 days ago, a decision that would undo everything they thought they were entitled to. And it all started with Samuel. Now here is where the story begins to shift. Pay attention, because this is where everything changes. Samuel had not always been a taxi driver in Lagos. 22 years ago, when he was 17, he was a houseboy. He worked in the Adewale mansion, the very same mansion in Ikoyi where Falake was now dying. He had come from the village, a small town in Anambra State, sent by his uncle to work for the rich family in the city. His parents were dead. His uncle couldn't afford to feed him. So at 17, Samuel became a servant. He cleaned the house. He washed the cars, 3 of them, every Saturday, with a bucket and a rag and a bar of soap that dried out his hands until the skin cracked. He ran errands, to the market for tomatoes, to the pharmacy for Chief Adewale's blood pressure pills, to the tailor for Kunle's school uniforms. He carried shopping bags and guests' luggage and trays of food at dinner parties where the guests didn't look at him. He was invisible. A pair of hands, a shadow that moved through the house doing things that needed to be done and disappearing before anyone had to acknowledge he was there. He slept on a thin mat in a small room behind the kitchen, a room that was really a storage closet with the shelves removed. It was hot in the dry season, so hot that the concrete walls radiated heat at night and sweat pooled on the mat beneath him. In the rainy season, the ceiling leaked in 2 places, and he positioned plastic bowls to catch the drips. Plip, 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 all night long. He was paid 30,000 naira a month. Pocket money, really. Barely enough for soap and transport and the occasional sachet of pure water. He sent half of it back to his uncle in the village.
He kept the rest in a tin can under his mat. But Falake noticed him.
That poor woman, bless her heart. She noticed the one person everyone else had learned not to see. She noticed the way he moved, careful, respectful, always watching, always learning. She noticed that after he finished his chores, he didn't sit around or sleep or gossip with the other staff. He read. He had found a stack of old newspapers in the storage room, yellowed copies of The Guardian and The Punch, some of them 2 years old, and he read them cover to cover. Then he read them again. He read the business section. He read the editorials. He read the sports section even though he didn't follow sports, because reading was reading, and he was hungry for it the way some people are hungry for food. She noticed that during dinner parties, when he served plates and refilled glasses, his eyes would track the conversations at the table, following the words, the arguments, the business talk. Like a student in a classroom who didn't have a desk but was learning anyway.
Chief Adewale would discuss shipping contracts and land acquisitions, and Samuel would stand at the wall holding a tray of drinks, and his eyes would move from speaker to speaker, taking in every word. One afternoon, it was a Wednesday during the dry season when the harmattan wind was blowing dust through every crack in the house, Falake was walking through the garden. She'd come from a meeting and was tired, and she was taking the long way around to the back entrance to avoid the noise from the living room where Kunle was watching television at full volume. She came around the corner of the garden wall and found Samuel sitting on a concrete block under the mango tree, reading. The book was a chemistry textbook, thick, battered, with half the pages missing and the cover torn off. He was reading it slowly, his lips moving with the words, his finger tracing the sentences. He was so absorbed that he didn't hear her coming. When he finally looked up and saw her standing there, he jumped to his feet so fast the book fell to the ground. "I'm sorry, Ma," he said. His voice was shaking. Houseboys were not supposed to be sitting down during work hours. Houseboys were not supposed to be reading. "I found it in the rubbish, outside Master Kunle's room. I will put it back." Falake bent down and picked up the book. She looked at it. She opened it to the page where he had been reading, a chapter on chemical bonds, with diagrams of molecular structures that Samuel had been tracing with his finger. She looked at the torn pages, the missing cover, the dirt on the edges. Then she looked at Samuel. "Do you understand what you're reading?" she asked. Samuel hesitated. "Some of it, Ma, not all. The diagrams help." "How far did you go in school?" "Primary 6, Ma. Then my uncle said there was no money." Falake closed the book. She held it for a moment, feeling its weight. Then she asked the question that changed Samuel's life. "Do you want to go to school?" Samuel stared at her. Nobody had ever asked him that question. Not once. Not his uncle, not the agency that placed him, not any of the dozens of people who walked past him every day in that house like he was part of the furniture. Nobody. "Yes, Ma," he whispered. "More than anything." Falake enrolled him in a secondary school. She paid his fees out of her personal account, not the family account, not the business account, her own money. She bought him uniforms and textbooks and a bag. She told the household staff that Samuel would work mornings and attend school in the afternoons. Kunle complained. He said it was a waste of money. Yemi said it was inappropriate. Tunde didn't care. But Falake overruled them all. For 2 years, Samuel went to school and worked in the house. He woke up at 4:30 in the morning to finish his chores before classes started. He cleaned bathrooms and mopped floors and polished shoes from 5 to 7. Then he changed into his school uniform in the small room behind the kitchen, the same room where he slept, where the walls were close and the ceiling leaked. And he walked 40 minutes to the school because the bus fare was money he would rather save. In the afternoons, he came back and worked until 9. At night, he studied. He had no desk, so he sat on his mat with the textbook propped against the wall and a candle burning beside him. Sometimes Falake would walk through the kitchen late at night and see the thin line of candlelight under his door, and she would stand there for a moment, listening to the silence of a boy studying, and her heart would break in a way that nobody in the world would understand. Because she was watching her son fight for his future through a closed door, and she couldn't tell him that the woman who paid for his education was the same woman who had given birth to him in a hospital in Onitsha on a Tuesday morning. He passed every exam.
Not just passed, excelled. His chemistry teacher called him the quiet genius. His mathematics teacher said he had never seen a student work so hard. He graduated near the top of his class, second in a class of 64 students, behind a girl named Amara who went on to study medicine, and later told Samuel at a reunion years later that she had always assumed he would become a professor. And on the day he received his certificate, a single sheet of paper in a brown envelope, the most valuable thing he had ever owned, Folake called him into her office. It was the first time he had been inside that room.
It smelled like leather chairs and old paper, and the perfume she wore. Something floral, something expensive, something that Samuel would recognize for the rest of his life in crowds and shops and passing strangers on the street. She handed him an envelope, thick, sealed. He opened it. Inside was money, more than he had ever seen, enough to rent a room and buy food and survive for 3 months while he found work. And a folded note, handwritten on cream-colored paper in small, careful letters. Go and build your life. You have earned it. If you ever need me, you know where I am. F.A. Samuel read the note 3 times. He looked up at Folake. She was sitting behind her desk with her hands folded and her face composed, but her eyes, those deep-set eyes that could silence a boardroom, were shining. She was holding everything inside, every word she wanted to say, every truth she wanted to tell. She held it all behind that composed face and those shining eyes, and she let her son walk away because she didn't know how to make him stay without telling him why. Samuel left the Adewale house that day. He was 19. He took a bus to the mainland. He rented a room. He got a job driving. And he built a life. Small, quiet, honest. He never went back to the mansion. Not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't feel he had the right. Folake was a billionaire. He was a taxi driver. The gap between them was so wide he couldn't even see across it. But he never forgot her. Every year on her birthday, December 14th, he said a prayer for her. He didn't know her phone number. He didn't have her email. He just prayed. And he kept the note she had given him, folded, worn, soft from 20 years of being carried in his wallet. And sometimes, on bad days, he would take it out and read it. Go and build your life. You have earned it. And then, 3 days ago, everything changed. But what happened next would turn Samuel's world upside down. A woman came to his taxi stand in Agege. She was middle-aged, heavy-set, wearing a nurse's uniform. She asked for Samuel by name. "Are you Samuel Obi?" she said. "Yes, who are you?" "My name is Grace. I am a nurse. I work for Chief Mrs. Adewale. She is very sick. She is dying. And she has been asking for you. She has been asking for 3 weeks. Nobody else would come to find you. So I came myself." Samuel's hand went to his wallet, to the note inside it. His thumb pressed against the worn fold of the paper. "She's asking for me?" he said. "She says you are the only honest person she has ever known. Please come. She doesn't have much time." Samuel closed his taxi for the day. He lost an entire day's income. He didn't hesitate. Sister Grace drove him to Ikoyi. They pulled into the circular driveway of the Adewale mansion. It was bigger than Samuel remembered. Whitewashed walls, tall iron gates, a garden with palm trees and bougainvillea that glowed pink and purple in the afternoon sun. 3 luxury cars were parked in the driveway. The front door was open, and from inside Samuel could hear voices, raised voices, arguing, echoing through the marble hallway. He walked inside. The house smelled the same way it did 20 years ago. Polished wood, air freshener, wealth. But underneath that, there was something new, something stale, something sick. He passed the parlor. Through the open doorway, he saw them, Kunle, Yemi, Tunde, 2 men in suits who were obviously lawyers. Papers spread across the table, voices sharp. Kunle was pointing at a document. Yemi was shaking her head. Tunde was leaning back in his chair with a glass of something amber. None of them looked up when Samuel walked past. He was invisible, just like he had been 22 years ago. Sister Grace led him upstairs, down the long hallway with the mahogany doors and the paintings of ancestors and the family photographs, Kunle's wedding, Yemi's graduation, Tunde's christening. No photograph of Samuel. Of course not. He had never been family. He had been the help. They reached the master bedroom. Sister Grace opened the door, and there she was. Folake Adewale was lying in a hospital bed in the center of the room. She was small now, shrunken, thin, her silver braids spread across the pillow like threads of silk. Her skin was ashen. Her eyes were closed. The monitors beeped. The IV dripped. The room smelled like lavender oil and medicine and the particular quiet sadness that fills a room where someone is leaving the world. Samuel stood in the doorway, his throat closed, his eyes burned. This was the woman who had changed his life. This was the woman who had looked at a 17-year-old houseboy with a torn book and asked, "Do you want to go to school?" And now she was dying. Alone, in a house full of people who were downstairs dividing her money like vultures at a carcass. He walked to the bed. He knelt down. He took her hand. It was thin and light, like paper, like something that could blow away. "Madam," he whispered. "It's Samuel. I'm here." Falake's eyes opened, slowly, like curtains being drawn back from a window. She looked at him, and despite everything, the pain, the drugs, the cancer that was eating her from the inside, she smiled. A small, tired, real smile. "Samuel," she said. Her voice was barely there, a breath with a word inside it. "You came." "I came, Ma. I'm here." She squeezed his hand. Her grip was so weak he barely felt it. But it was there. She was holding on. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Before they come, before the lawyers, before my children decide what happens." Samuel leaned closer. "I'm listening, Ma." And then Folake Adewale said 3 words that would change Samuel's life forever. "You are mine." Samuel didn't understand. He frowned. He looked at Sister Grace, who was standing by the door with her hand over her mouth and tears running down her face. He looked back at Folake. "Ma? I don't understand. What do you mean?" Folake's eyes were clear, clearer than they had been in weeks, Sister Grace would later say. Like the fog of medication and pain had lifted for one final window. Like her body knew this was the most important moment of her life and was giving her everything it had left. "You are my son, Samuel, my firstborn child, my blood." The words hit Samuel like a wave, not all at once, but in stages. First the words themselves, just sounds, syllables hanging in the air. Then the meaning, arriving a half-second later, crashing into his chest. Then the understanding, vast, enormous, impossible, flooding in behind it and filling every empty space inside him. "Before I married Chief Adewale," Folake said, her voice barely above a breath. "Before the companies, before the money, before the big house and the servants and the children you know. I was a girl in a village. I was 18 years old. Your father's name was Emeka. He was a carpenter, a good man, a poor man, a man who loved me. We were going to marry, but I got pregnant, and my family was ashamed." She paused. Breathing was hard now. Each sentence was a mountain she was climbing with no strength left. "My mother, your grandmother, she was a proud woman. She said I could not keep you and marry well. She said a girl with a baby and no husband was finished. So she sent me to a hospital in Onitsha. I had you there. You were born on a Tuesday morning. 7 pounds. You cried so loud the nurses laughed. I held you for 2 hours. 2 hours, Samuel. That was all they gave me. And then my mother came and took you from my arms and gave you to your uncle, your father's brother, and told me to go home and forget." Samuel's body was shaking. Not trembling, shaking, like something deep inside him was coming apart. His hand gripped hers, and he could feel her pulse against his palm. Faint, unsteady, but there. Still there. "They told me Emeka died the following year. Malaria.
I never saw him again. I never saw you again. Until 17 years later, when your uncle sent you to my house as a houseboy. She closed her eyes for a moment. A tear slid from the corner of her eye down her temple and disappeared into the silver braids on the pillow. When you walked through my gate at 17 years old, skinny, scared, carrying a bag smaller than my handbag, I knew. The moment I saw your face. You had his face, Samuel. Your father's face. His jaw, his hands. His way of watching everything quietly, like you were memorizing the world so nobody could take it from you. I knew you were mine. I knew it in my bones. Why didn't you tell me? Samuel's voice was broken, shattered. The voice of a man whose whole life had just been rewritten in 3 minutes.
Because I was a coward, Folake said.
The word came out hard, like she was punishing herself with it. I was afraid of what my husband would say. A child from before the marriage, born to a village carpenter. I was afraid of what Kunle and Yemi and Tunde would do. I was afraid that you would hate me for giving you up. And I was afraid that if I told the truth, everything I had built, this house, this company, this life, would crumble. So instead of telling you the truth, I sent you to school. I paid your fees. I watched you study by candlelight through the kitchen window. And I wrote you that note. And I watched you walk out the gate. And I stood at my bedroom window and I cried for 3 hours. Because my son was leaving, and he didn't even know I was his mother. Samuel was crying, silently. The tears ran down his face and dropped onto her hand, onto the white hospital sheet, onto the floor. He couldn't speak. He couldn't breathe. 22 years.
22 years of wondering why this rich woman had been kind to a houseboy. 22 years of carrying her note in his wallet like a talisman. And now he knew. He had been carrying his mother's goodbye.
The will, Folake whispered. I changed it 3 days ago. You are named. Everything I have, the companies, the properties, the accounts, it goes to you. My lawyer has the documents. Sister Grace is the witness. My children will fight it. They will say I was not in my right mind. But I am. Samuel, look at me. He looked at her. Through the tears, through the shock, through the earthquake that was happening inside his chest. I am in my right mind, she said. And I am giving you what I should have given you 39 years ago. Not money, not buildings, not an empire. I am giving you the truth. You are my son. You were always my son. She closed her eyes. Her hand relaxed in his. The monitor beeped, and the room went quiet. But this story is far from over.
Sister Grace called the family.
She stood at the top of the stairs and said, Madam wants to see her children. All of them. Now. They came up. Kunle first, adjusting his cufflinks, annoyed at the interruption. Yemi behind him, checking her phone. Tunde last, carrying his glass. They walked into the bedroom and saw Samuel kneeling at the bed, holding their mother's hand. Kunle stopped. Who is this? What is this man doing in here? Folake opened her eyes. Sit down, she said. Her voice was weak, but her tone was steel. The same tone that had run a $200 million empire for 20 years. The tone that no one in the family had ever disobeyed. They sat. On chairs, on the edge of the unused sofa, wherever they could find space in a room that suddenly felt too small for all the people and all the lies that were in it. They looked at Samuel. They looked at their mother. Kunle crossed his arms. Yemi clutched her phone like a lifeline.
Tunde set his glass on the windowsill and, for once, said nothing. This is Samuel, Folake said. Her voice was weak. Each word cost her something. You could see it in her face, in the tightening around her eyes. But her gaze was steady. Some of you may remember him. He worked in this house 20 years ago. He cleaned your rooms, he washed your cars. He carried your bags and served your food and slept in a closet behind the kitchen while you slept in bedrooms the size of apartments. She paused to breathe. Sister Grace stepped forward to adjust the oxygen, but Folake waved her away with a small movement of her hand. She wasn't done.
Kunle, do you remember him? Kunle shifted in his chair. Vaguely. He was one of the houseboys. He was the houseboy who read your chemistry textbook, the one you threw in the rubbish because you couldn't be bothered to study. He fished it out of the bin and read it by candlelight.
Half the pages were missing, and he still learned more from it than you did.
Kunle's jaw tightened. He said nothing. He is also my son, my firstborn child, born before I married your father, born in a hospital in Onitsha when I was 18 years old and terrified and alone. Taken from me by my own family because a girl with a baby and no husband was not the kind of girl who married a chief. I have kept this secret for 39 years, and I am done keeping it. The room was not just silent, it was frozen, like time itself had stopped to listen. Kunle stood up slowly. His face had gone from confusion to disbelief to something harder, something that looked like the early stages of fury being held behind a dam. This is madness. You are not well, Mama. The medication is affecting your mind. We need to call the doctor. Sit down. Falake's voice cut through the room like a blade. 2 words. That was all she needed. Even from a hospital bed.
Even with tubes in her arms and monitors attached to her chest, and cancer dissolving her from the inside. She was still Chief Mrs. Falake Adewale, and in this house, her word was law. Kunle sat. I have changed my will, Falake said. Samuel is the primary heir. He will inherit the controlling share of Adewale Holdings and the Ikoyi property. The remainder will be divided equally among the 3 of you. The documents are with Barrister Afolabi. They are signed, witnessed, and legal. Yemi's mouth opened. Mama, you can't. I can. I have. And I will tell you why. She looked at each of them, one by one. Kunle, Yemi, Tunde, her living children, the ones who were downstairs dividing her money while she lay up here dying. I have been in this bed for 8 months. 8 months. How many times has Kunle visited? 4. How many times has Yemi called? She sends money. She doesn't send herself. And Tunde comes when he needs something, which is always.
Her voice was shaking now, but not from weakness, from something fiercer, from a mother's fury.
I built this empire. Your father built the foundation, but I built the walls and the roof and everything inside. And I did not build it so that the 3 of you could tear it apart before my body is cold. She turned to Samuel. She reached for his hand again. He gave it. This man, she said, has nothing. He drives a taxi. He lives in 1 room. He owns 1 good shirt. And when I sent for him, when I asked him to come, he came. He lost a day's pay to sit at my bedside. He held my hand. He called me madam. Her voice cracked. He doesn't even know to call me mother yet. But he will. Because he is the only one of my children who came to me without wanting something in return. She looked at Kunle. You came 4 times. Each time you asked about the will. She looked at Yemi. You send money. But money is not love. Money is what you send when you don't want to show up. She looked at Tunde.
You owe more than you are worth, and still you come asking for more.
Then she said the line that would echo through that family for generations. I am not punishing you. I am correcting a wrong that is 39 years old. You cannot inherit what you did not earn. And you cannot earn love by waiting for someone to die so you can take what they built. The room was silent. Kunle's face was gray. Yemi was crying. Whether from guilt or anger, it was impossible to tell. Tunde set his glass on the nightstand and stared at the floor. Falake closed her eyes. She was exhausted. The words had taken everything she had left. Sister Grace moved to the bed and checked the monitors. She looked at Samuel and nodded toward the door. The family needed time, and Falake needed rest. Samuel stood up. His legs were shaking. He walked to the door. And just before he stepped out, Falake said one more thing. Her voice was almost gone, a whisper inside a whisper. Samuel. He turned. Yes, Ma.
Don't let them take it from you. You earned it.
Every day you drove that taxi and lived honestly and carried my note in your wallet. You earned it. Samuel pressed his lips together. He nodded once, and he walked out of the room. And what Samuel was about to face would test everything he believed about himself. Folake Adewale died 4 days later, peacefully, in her sleep, with Sister Grace beside her and Samuel's note, the one she had written him 20 years ago, resting on the pillow next to her face. She had asked Grace to put it there. She wanted to be close to the words she had given her son, the last connection between them before the truth came out. The funeral was enormous. 500 people, a cathedral, newspaper obituaries, politicians and business leaders and society figures in black. Kunle gave a speech. He called Folake a titan of industry and a loving mother. He did not mention Samuel. But the will was read 2 weeks later in Barrister Afolabi's office.
Samuel was there. Kunle was there with his own lawyer. Yemi was there on video call from Abuja. Tunde was there, sober for possibly the first time in months. The will was clear. Folake had been thorough. DNA test results, taken from a sample of Samuel's blood 3 days before she died, matched against her own, confirmed maternity. The documents were witnessed, notarized, and ironclad. Barrister Afolabi read the terms slowly, clearly, without emotion. Kunle contested it. Of course he did. He filed a lawsuit the next day. He claimed undue influence. He claimed mental incapacity. He claimed fraud. He hired the most expensive law firm in Lagos. He gave interviews to newspapers calling Samuel an imposter and a con man who manipulated a dying woman. Samuel said nothing. He didn't give interviews. He didn't hire a publicist. He did what he had always done. He showed up, he told the truth, and he waited. The case took 7 months. 7 months of courtrooms and depositions and lawyers in expensive suits arguing over a dead woman's wishes. The judge reviewed everything. The medical records showing Folake was lucid and coherent. The DNA results confirming maternity with 99.98% certainty. The testimony of Sister Grace, who had been in the room every day for 8 months. The testimony of Barrister Afolabi, who had drafted the will and witnessed Folake's signature. And the testimony of 2 independent physicians who confirmed that Folake was mentally competent when she changed her estate documents. The judge also reviewed the visitor's log from the house, a record that Sister Grace had kept meticulously, writing down every name, every date, every duration. 4 visits from Kunle in 8 months, averaging less than 45 minutes each. 2 visits from Yemi, both under an hour, both ending with requests for documents related to the estate. 6 visits from Tunde, each one ending with a request for money, and daily visits from Samuel in the final 4 days of Folake's life, sitting at her bedside, holding her hand, reading to her from the Bible because Sister Grace had told him it was her favorite book. Kunle's lawyers argued hard. They brought in their own doctors. They challenged the DNA test. They questioned Sister Grace's credibility. They called Samuel a fortune hunter, an opportunist, a man who had manipulated a dying woman. But Samuel sat in that courtroom, in his one good white shirt, ironed the night before, his hands folded in his lap, and he answered every question honestly, calmly, without anger. When the opposing lawyer asked, "Did you know she was your mother before she told you?" Samuel said, "No, sir. I thought she was a kind woman who helped a houseboy go to school." When the lawyer asked, "Don't you find it convenient that you learned of this relationship only after she decided to change her will?" Samuel said, "I find it sad, sir. I would rather have known 39 years ago and had a mother than learn it now and have an inheritance." The courtroom went quiet after that. The judge wrote something down. Kunle's lawyer sat down. The verdict came on a Friday afternoon. The will stood. Samuel Adewale Obi, as the court now recognized him, was the rightful heir to the controlling share of the Adewale estate. Now, what Samuel did with that inheritance is the part that tells you everything about who he really is. Because this is where most stories end. Man gets money, man changes. But Samuel didn't change. That's the point. That's the whole point. He didn't fire Kunle. He didn't throw Yemi out of the family. He didn't humiliate Tunde. He didn't do any of the things that people expected, any of the things that the newspapers speculated about.
any of the things that the Lagos gossip mills whispered over drinks and dinner parties. Instead, he called a family meeting.
He sent a handwritten note, not a text, not an email, a handwritten note on plain paper to each of Falake's 3 children. The note said, "I would like to meet with you, Saturday, 10 a.m. at the house. I am not your enemy, Samuel." Kunle almost didn't come. Yemi flew in from Abuja. Tunde arrived sober, wearing a clean shirt, the first time anyone had seen him sober on a Saturday in years. They gathered in the parlor, the same parlor where 9 months earlier they had sat dividing their mother's estate while she died upstairs. The same mahogany table, the same leather chairs. But the room felt different now. The air was different, because the man sitting at the head of the table was not a billionaire's son who had been handed everything. He was a taxi driver who had earned nothing and been given everything. And he had more right to that chair than any of them. Samuel looked at his half-siblings, these strangers who shared his blood but not his life, who had grown up in this house while he slept on a mat behind the kitchen, who had eaten at this table while he served the food. He didn't feel anger. He didn't feel superiority. He felt sad, because they were all Falake's children, and Falake had wanted them to be a family. That was the one thing she couldn't buy and couldn't build and couldn't put in a will. "I don't want your jobs," Samuel said. "I don't want your houses. I don't want revenge. I want this family to be what she wanted it to be, that's all." He restructured the company. He kept Kunle as managing director, but hired an independent board of 5 professionals to oversee finances and hold everyone, including Samuel, accountable. He paid off Tunde's debts, all of them, and set up a monthly trust with the condition that Tunde enter a treatment program for his drinking. Tunde resisted at first. Then he didn't. Then, 3 months later, he showed up at the Ikoyi house with clear eyes and a quiet voice and said, "Thank you." 2 words, but they meant everything. Samuel called Yemi personally. She was guarded on the phone, defensive, embarrassed, unsure what to say to this brother she had never known she had. Samuel said, "Your mother wanted you here. Not your money, not your transfers. You. She wanted to hear your voice and see your face and know that you came because you wanted to, not because you had to. I'm asking the same thing." Yemi was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I'll come next weekend." She did, and the weekend after that, and the one after that. He used a portion of the inheritance to build a school in the village where he was born, a proper school, with concrete classrooms and painted walls and desks and textbooks, and a library with books that had all their pages. He hired teachers and paid them salaries that were actually livable. He named the school after his father, the Emeka Obi Memorial Academy. A carpenter's name above the door of a school in a village where carpenters' sons were not supposed to become anything at all. And he kept driving the taxi. Not every day, not 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, the way he used to, but 3 mornings a week, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Samuel got up at 5 o'clock, put on a clean shirt, walked past the 3 luxury cars in the Ikoyi driveway, and got into his old gray Toyota Camry with the cracked windshield and the scentless pine tree air freshener. He drove through the streets of Lagos the way he always had. He picked up market women carrying bags of peppers and tomatoes. He picked up school children in uniforms who couldn't afford the bus. He picked up old men going to hospital appointments who needed someone to wait in the car park until they were done. He charged the same fares he had always charged.
He said good morning and thank you and God bless you, and he meant every word the same way he had always meant them. People talked. Of course they talked. Lagos is a city that talks. The newspapers wrote about it. The billionaire who drives a taxi. The internet had opinions. Some people said he was humble. Some people said he was crazy. Some people said it was a publicity stunt. Samuel didn't care about any of it. When passengers recognized him, and sometimes they did, from the newspaper articles and the television coverage of the court case, they would ask, "Are you really the Adewale heir? Why are you driving a taxi?" And Samuel would adjust his mirror and check his blind spot and say simply, "Because this is where I learned who I am, and I don't want to forget." One afternoon, about a year after the funeral, Samuel was sitting in the garden of the Ikoyi mansion, his house now, though he still caught himself calling it Madam's house in his head.
He was sitting on the same concrete block where Folake had found him 22 years ago, with a torn chemistry textbook pressed against his chest. The mango tree was still there, taller, wider, its branches heavy with fruit. The bougainvillea was blooming along the garden wall, pink and purple and orange, so bright it hurt to look at. The air smelled like flowers and warm concrete and the faint salt of the lagoon carried on the evening breeze. Sister Grace brought him a glass of water. She had stayed on after Folake died. Samuel had asked her to, and she had said yes without hesitation. She sat down on the bench nearby, the same bench where she used to sit during Folake's afternoon naps, reading her Bible and listening for the monitors. They were quiet for a while, the kind of quiet that doesn't need to be filled. Then Grace said, "She would be proud of you. You know that, don't you?" Samuel reached into his pocket.
He took out the note. The same note, the one she had written him 20 years ago. It was so worn now that the paper was soft as cloth. The ink had faded in places. One of the folds had torn and been carefully taped back together. He unfolded it and read it one more time. The words he had read 1,000 times. The words that had carried him through 20 years of early mornings and late nights and loneliness and soup cooked on a gas burner in a room with a stained ceiling. Go and build your life. You have earned it. He folded it back up. He held it in his palm. This small, worn, precious thing that was the first gift his mother had ever given him, even though neither of them knew it at the time. And he said quietly to the mango tree and the bougainvillea and the evening sky and the ghost of a woman who had loved him from a distance for 39 years, "I'm building it, Ma. I'm still building it." The evening light came through the palm trees and turned the garden gold.
A bird sang from the roof, the same roof that Samuel had once looked up at from the servants' quarters and thought was the tallest thing in the world. And Samuel sat on the concrete block where his life had changed twice. Once at 17 when a woman asked him if he wanted to go to school, and once at 39 when she told him why. And he let the quiet hold him. That poor boy. That sweet, humble man who read torn books by candlelight and washed cars with cracked hands and drove a taxi through the loud, hot, beautiful streets of Lagos for 20 years without ever asking for anything he hadn't earned. He had found something that all the money in the world cannot buy. He found out where he came from. He found out who loved him. And in finding that, in hearing 3 words from a dying woman's lips on a Tuesday afternoon in December, he had finally found where he belonged. And isn't that what we're all looking for? Isn't that the only thing that really matters? Not the money, not the buildings, not the empire. Just someone who looks at you and says, "You are mine." Just someone who sees you, really sees you, and claims you as their own. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed creating it. Like, share, and comment on the lessons you've learned. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. See you in my next story.